Hello and welcome. I'm Olga Hannanen, and this is Academia Experience. Today, I'm on Tenerife, Spain, a departure point of the 12th Digital Nomad Cruise. Our guest, Shaun Busuttil, a travel writer, journalist, and a doctoral student at the University of Melbourne, has been on board of that Digital Nomad Cruise. In this episode, he shares his experiences and observations of a 10-day journey on board. Hi, Shaun. Thank you for joining our podcast today.
You're welcome. Hello.
So, Shaun, you have taken part in a digital nomad cruise that sailed across the Atlantic Ocean from the Spanish island of Tenerife to Salvador, Brazil. And as a nomad and as a researcher who is doing research on digital nomads, could you share some insights about the cruise and what was your interest in the cruise?
Yeah, so I've been a nomad myself since 2013. And throughout those years, I often met people that had done the Nomad Cruise and that were a part of the Nomad Cruise community. And I always felt that there was some kind of disconnect between myself and these Nomad cruises. And not just for me, other nomads would also often report that they found the Nomad Cruise people to be quite standoffish. And I was interested to do the cruise to see whether if I would do the cruise, I would be welcomed into that little sub community. So it was kind of an experiment to see whether me as an outsider to the nomad based community would be welcomed into the nomad based community as an insider. And I also like the idea of, getting a bunch of nomads that are so used to having their mobility and traveling around the world, locking them in a cruise ship for 9 days and not, they don't really have access to the internet, and to see how the community comes together on that cruise ship and see, how we bond, how we make connections, and just the overall social dynamics of these nomads on a conference at sea effectively.
That's interesting to hear that this is in a way, a closed community, this digital nomad cruise community, and that there is no internet. I would think that the cruise ship would definitely have a stable bandwidth for digital nomads. So, in your opinion, and from your experience, what is the main motivation for people, for digital nomads to join that cruise? And are they all digital nomads who join?
Yeah, they weren't all digital nomads. Some of them were kind of what you would call aspiring digital nomads. So they were thinking about becoming nomadic, maybe because they just got a remote job, or they were thinking about getting a remote job. Most of them were affiliated with remote work in some capacity. Maybe some of them were remote workers, but stayed in one place. And a lot of them were nomadic, so they were continually traveling around the world whilst working. But many were just flirting with the idea and wanted to get a sense of what the community was like. And I think the main reason why people joined the Nomad Cruise was for that sense of community. So, nomads traveling for the most part on their own, they're continually taking themselves out of social networks and having to rebuild social connections again and again. And I think a lot of nomads are really looking for community, and Nomad Cruise really sells itself as a community event. So it's a way for all these nomads to come together, meet other nomads, make connections, make not just personal connections. A lot of them are also interested in making professional connections. So, networking. Um, so that's the main part. A lot of nomads also, um, not a lot, but some go there to basically market themselves to other nomads. So there's a lot of nomads that present talks and workshops, and they're given really a space through which to sell their products and services to other nomads. So that's another motivation. Some nomads as well just wanted people to meet and to be able to travel with in South America. Like a lot of female nomads told me again and again that they came on this cruise to find other nomads to travel around South America because they were scared of safety concerns about traveling as a single female in South America. And a lot of people that joined Nomad Cruise are repeat cruisers. So they call themselves cruisers, and they perhaps had done a nomad cruise the year before. And so for them, it's an opportunity for them to meet up with other cruiser friends. So a lot of cruisers will say, "Hey, let's all do the Nomad Cruise 12, and we're all going to meet there." So it's a chance for those people to resume their relationships with their nomadic friends. But there's many different reasons why people join. Um, there's also myself, a researcher. I met another researcher on board the ship as well that was there to study this community of people. There were journalists on board as well to kind of write a story about nomads. So it's a mixed bag of different kinds of people and motivations.
That's interesting. And I find it fascinating that it's like a digital nomad cruise. It's like a meetup place for some people, that they do not go to a specific destination, but they, sail across the Atlantic or take some other trips on board. Um, so, can you share some insights about what is happening on board? You mentioned that there are some workshops and other ways to build communities. So,
The days are quite action packed. From about 9 o'clock in the morning until about 5 o'clock, there's a series of workshops and presentations and talks in two main streams. There's like an entrepreneurial stream where people are talking about various entrepreneurial topics, how to 10x your income, how to optimize your tax as a global citizen, how to earn passive income from real estate, how to automate your business. So there's that stream. And then there's also a stream that would fall under the umbrella of personal development and almost spirituality. So deep connection workshops, how to find out what your attachment style is, and all that stuff. And so these are opportunities for nomads to come together to learn a little bit about themselves, or how to, optimize their business. And then there's also 3 meals a day where you get to sit down with a random bunch of nomads and, try to make connections over a meal. And then in the evening, there's usually some kind of social activity like a talent show or an ecstatic dance, and there's various parties, and that's when the alcohol starts flowing, and then some, more connections are made, through the buzz of beer. And then the nights can last until the early hours of the morning, and then back up at 9 o'clock, there's another day of workshop. So I found it to be quite exhausting, and a lot of people on board found it to be quite exhausting because there's also the element of, FOMO, or fear of missing out. So people want to go to all the workshops, go to all the events, and yeah, it's very exhausting. It's very there's always something to do.
yeah, that was actually my question. That it feels like you are not on a relaxing cruise, but you work every day in a way. You are on a journey to discover yourself, or build connections, or find clients. Actually, you mentioned that Nomad advertise their services to other nomads, sell their services. But is there recruitment happening? Like, do nomads also maybe hire someone?
Yeah, I think that on, yeah, for sure. A lot of people are kind of, yeah, networking and maybe partnering up with other kind of nomads. I think what I found interesting, the Nomad Cruise attracts a certain kind of nomad. It attracts the entrepreneurial nomad. And so I would say, I don't want to give statistics, but more than half of the people on board were entrepreneurial nomads looking to make these connections to partner up and to improve their business. So there was a lot of that kind of going on. And I think um, it was interesting because some of the nomads that joined up weren't entrepreneurially minded at all, and felt like they were a little bit of a minority on board. And for some nomads, I mean, it's interesting, like a lot of nomads, as I said before, nomads joined Nomad Cruise to find community, to find that sense of connection. And many nomads did find connection on board. They found their tribe, but many didn't either. Many kind of felt alienated from this community. And I remember talking to a few nomads that had, just recently become nomadic and joined this cruise to find some friends and to find some community. And they were quite uh, disappointed that they didn't find what they were looking for. Many of them felt like they were sold to the entire time and just felt like it just wasn't their crowd. And I think that speaks to the diversity of the nomad community. It's not just one type of person. I think especially now in the post-pandemic world, so many new people are coming into this space. And speaking to a couple of cruisers that had done the cruise many times before, they were quite also disappointed with the new breed or generation of nomads coming into the space that don't really have, and I'm generalizing here, but this is from their perspective. They were telling me that they don't really have that sense of curiosity about the world and are not really open to making connections with other people and locals as well. And a couple of them were just disappointed that this may be the direction that the community or the lifestyle is heading in, which, is a consequence of it becoming way more easy to do now, way more mainstream. So that was interesting. So a lot of people found what they were looking for, and then a lot of people didn't as well, which I found quite interesting. And yeah,
Yeah, and you mentioned that about half of the nomads on the cruise were entrepreneurial. Uh, in numbers, what we are talking about, like exactly how many people are on the cruise? Yeah, just to clarify for the listeners.
there were 400 nomads on the cruise that I did, which was back in December 2023. So about 400 nomads at sea for 9 days. Um, so yeah, but I don't even, it may be more than 50%, but it seems like most people that I encountered and, from stories from other participants had their own business and, and yeah, very entrepreneurial. So if you weren't that way inclined, I think it could have been quite an alienating experience to be stuck at sea with a group of people that you don't really click with. And for people that did join to find people that they clicked with, it was quite yeah, not ideal for them.
Yeah, I see. That's a very interesting observation, I would say, because uh, you would think that you join the cruise and you mingle and find your community, but then in the end, you might not. Going into what is happening on board, I know that you yourself also organized a workshop for digital nomads. Could you share some insights about that?
Yeah. So I originally wanted to do a small kind of focus group talking about some of the challenges of the lifestyle that kind of relate to my research. So I wanted to talk about um, what nomads do to find friends and to make connections, and to uh, how they deal with the concept I call social transience, which is the idea that, nomadic connections are only short lived for the most part. They come and they go, and how that generates feelings of loneliness and how people deal with that aspect of the lifestyle. And I also wanted to talk about what nomads thought about their impacts on the communities that host them through phenomenons like transnational gentrification. And also a lot of nomads, I found, are looking for a sense of home, having felt alienated in their home societies and trying to find the community of people that kind of get them. So I wanted to run a little focus group and hear what people had to say about it. Um, Originally, well, I thought it would be a small group. It turned out to be 80 people turned up to this talk. So it wasn't a focus group. It was more like a group discussion. But it was interesting to hear people's thoughts on this stuff. And I think another, not surprising, I guess, but it was encouraging to see that a lot of nomads are mindful of their impacts on local communities and are trying to minimize it. The tension is they also want to maximize the quality of their life. That's why they move to places where it's cheaper. But in doing that, they can you know, indirectly, sometimes directly make life more difficult for the people that live there. So there's that challenge where they want to do what's best for them, but they're also mindful of what's best for them may not be best for local communities. So anyway, it was a group discussion, had some really, really interesting insights. A lot of people did um, feel like they were looking for home through this lifestyle. So yeah, for a lot of people, digital nomadism isn't just about living somewhere cheaper. It is finding a sense of belonging with people that kind of get them. You know, a lot of nomads felt like they were black sheep where they were from. People around them didn't really understand, their life. They had different values to people back home, and they find that sense of connection and like-mindedness with other nomads, and that keeps them into the lifestyle despite the challenges of loneliness that continually come up. So yeah, it turned out just to be a group discussion, and it was interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting insight, I would say, about the feeling alienated from your home society. That's one of these push factors. That's what we say about starting this lifestyle. And um, most of the time, you would think that it's not a big issue in the whole nomadic uh, experience or in the whole nomadic movement, we would say. But listening to you, it seems that this actually, people are pushed because maybe economic or political reasons, or as a sign of civil protest, they leave their home country and are trying to find a new place, a new home. And yeah, thank you for sharing this very, very intriguing insight about what you found out.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
there's an existential push factor as well, that sense of trying to find that sense of belonging, trying to find home. But, oftentimes it also combines with, economic factors also, and, all these other factors that kind of go into the decision to become nomadic. But I think, yeah, for many nomads, it's difficult to say what percentage, because we don't really know how
mhm.
many nomads there are. But for a sizable portion, yeah, that there are existential push factors to their mobility.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So, in your opinion, what was the highlight of your cruise experience? Like, as you lived for 9 days on board, um, what you would say was the highlight?
Um, like, cruise itself was interesting to be, in between continents. There was one time where in the middle of the cruise, we were literally in the middle of nowhere. Europe was over there, South America was over there, and this sense of being in liminal space, between in nothing. But I think as a researcher, I think the most interesting part was, um, as I said before, like, I always felt like I was an insider in the nomad community. And this time I wasn't, I was an outsider. And it was really great to have that outside perspective, because I could look back on this community from a, external position. And it was the first time in my nomadic career that I felt like an outsider. And as a social scientist, I mean, we do want to achieve some kind of objective distance from, our subjects. So that was really, really interesting. And it made me think about, well, what is the nomad community really? Like, I've been living as a nomad for 12 years, and I'd been around these kinds of nomads, but I always thought, well, there's also other sides. There are also different flavors of digital nomadism. But it just made me think that, maybe this is the mainstream nomadism, this community of entrepreneurial kind of people. And it was interesting to see that as an outsider and to feel like an outsider. Um, but yeah, I also got to meet some interesting people, got to make some friends, so that was a highlight as well. And to be in South America, in Brazil, was an amazing experience. Once we touched land, to see land after not seeing any land for 5 days was quite cool. And I also remember I used to go for runs on the cruise ship, and to be running laps in the middle of the ocean was quite interesting. Felt quite cool.
Oh, that's yeah, interesting experience, I believe. That was actually my last question, whether you actually made some friends and are you still in a way connected to some people whom you met on the Digital Nomad Cruise?
Yes, yes. So I'm
Mm.
still in contact with some of them. So, I was a part of that community, that minority that felt alienated, and we would bond over our sense of alienation from the main group. So we did forge some strong ties, and I'm still in contact with these people as well. So um yeah, it was I did get to make some good connections. But as I said, like for a lot of people, they did find some amazing connections. Like some people talked about the Nomad Cruise community as being like a family, and some people did not find that at all.
Mhm.
So it was interesting to, why did some people feel that sense of connection and why didn't others? I find that to be quite interesting.
Yeah, it's also highlights that we should not treat digital nomads as a homogeneous group. It's very diverse, age-wise, background-wise, interest-wise, um, job-wise, very, very diverse group. So thank you, Sean, for sharing all these very interesting insights about the Digital Nomad Cruise. And I'm sure that episode would be interesting for both academic and non-academic people who will maybe also are interested in taking part in this cruise.
I would recommend it
Mhm.
to anyone, to researchers and to participants alike. I think it's a really interesting kind of experience, and you can make some really good connections on board, and get a sense of at least a certain flavor of the nomad community. But still, I think it's important, as you said, to be mindful that it's not a homogenous group, especially now since COVID and more people coming into the space. It's really blown up into a diverse community, just like any kind of community. So, but yeah, thanks for your time, and it was nice to see you.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Check out academia experience elsewhere.